Hey, luck is a luck.
Hey guys, it's Midnight Philosopher, and welcome to my guide on how to pick your very first American 1100. Word on the street is that this lock's been giving you a hard time, and I'm here to help fix that. I put together a table of contents here to be going over what I'll show in the video. First one being understanding the lock components and the pins that are inside and the kind of feedback that you'll be expecting to get. Number two is the correct pick shape and how to determine what that is. Number three is how to attack the lock, and for example, how to hold the lock and the angle that you want to put your pick into the keyway. Number four is marking your pick. This is a very important step that I think a lot of beginners skip and makes a huge difference. I'll be showing how to go about doing that. Number five, I'll be teaching you guys what progressive pinning is and sharing what I think is an optimal strategy on how to go about it. And number six, I'll be showing some opening tips and tricks and a little bit of a demonstration to help you guys work through the lock. Without further ado, let's get right into it. Here's what's inside of an American 1100 and what you can expect to find inside of one that you're trying to pick. These are the two types of driver pins that you can expect to find inside of the lock. The first one being a serrated spool. You can see the thin section in the middle and the two lips on the top and bottom, each with a serration inside, and a serrated pin with 4 serrations along the surface from the top to the bottom. When trying to pick a serrated spool pin, I find that it acts pretty much like a normal spool pin, whereas you'll fall into a false set. You apply pressure to the pin, it will give you counter rotation, and then it will set, and you'll either fall into another false set or the lock will open. With the serrated pin, when you apply pressure to the pin, you'll get a click for every single serration that passes the shear line. When you actually set the pin to shear, if you're paying extra attention, I find that it gives a little bit more of a different type of click. Also, you will find some locks have all serrated driver pins or even all serrated spool pins, and that really just depends on the factory and or the locksmith where you got it. There's no actual standard of how many pins should be in a lock, so some locks have a mix or some locks only have one kind. Here are the two types of key pins that you will find inside the lock: standard and serrated. If you notice, the standard one is a lot shorter, and that's because under a certain height they actually won't include the serrations on the key pin. But what that means for the key pins with the serrations is that when you overset those pins, they will bind a lot more tightly on the shear line and will be very difficult to drop back down unless you basically reset everything. So when you are picking anything inside these locks, you need to have very sensitive feeling and touch in order to avoid oversetting anything so you don't get stuck into that state. The springs are pretty short, and as you can see, they sit pretty deep inside of the chambers. Unlike some springs on some locks that actually protrude out of the chambers, they're also pretty weak springs, which means that they require very little force in order to pick. They're so weak and loose, in fact, that if you can see, the driver pin is already almost at the shear line just from the sheer looseness of the spring inside of that slot. A quick note to mention is that the core comes with 6 slots, but it's only pinned up to 5. Also, if you look at the housing, there's a little nub on one side here, and on the other side it's flush. That's how you can tell which side is the front, and it's designed that way so that the plug can sit flushly inside of the housing. Furthermore, if you don't have a good follower, a good option is a AAA battery. There are holes at the bottom of the housing that you have to be very careful to not drop your key pins out of. Once the core is rotated 180 degrees, then those key pins can fall out of those slots. But also your lock will be stuck, and there's 2 very easy fixes to that. The reason why it's stuck is because if you look carefully, you can see those driver pins in the bottom of the keyway there that's blocking the core to rotate. If you take the C-clip off, you can literally just push it out like that. But an easier fix is just to take your pick, put it in upside down, push all those driver pins up, and then you'll be able to rotate the plug. Before you lock it up though, make sure all your key pins are in. So I would say keep it in that state, gut it, make sure everything is in the right position, and then you're good to lock it back up once you know everything is where it should be. What is the correct pick shape? There's two factors that we want to focus on when asking ourselves this question. First of all, thickness of the pick, and secondly, the angle of the hook on the end. In order to determine the angle of the hook on the end, we can use the key as if we were going into the plug. And we want to see if we can reach all of the highest cut pins without oversetting any of the lower cut pins. Obviously, if you check from this side right here, you will overset pins, but when you are picking the lock, you have a lot of space down here to lever your pick. And if you can see now, that highest cut pin in slot 3, I can reach it without oversetting any of the other pins. So this hook should work to pick this lock. The second question we want to ask ourselves is the pick thick enough? One way we can check this is actually testing out your pick inside of the keyway and see if it can slide in there smoothly without rubbing too much. And as you can see, this pick can slide all the way through in between that little half circle here that sticks out from the right side, and it can comfortably go up into those slots. Now, if your pick is too thick, it will actually catch and rub, and you'll really have to grind it through, and that will kill a lot of your feedback. Conversely, if it's too thin, then it will be weak and take away some of your feedback as well. So you need to find that good balance. I find for this lock, somewhere around 18 thousandths of an inch is the perfect fit. How to attack the lock. First of all, I always prefer to use a blunt object as opposed to, no, I'm just kidding. When I'm talking about attacking the lock, I'm talking about how to hold it. First of all, when I'm picking padlocks, I like to hold them in my hand like this. Gives me a good solid grip of the padlock and gives me the ability to hold the tensioner in a comfortable way. Although I have seen people hold tensioners in awkward ways with their thumbs like this, and I just personally find it's not as effective because I just don't feel the feedback as well through my thumb. If you do hold it like that, try to hold higher up on your tensioner. The lower down you hold, the more you kill your feedback. So find a method that is comfortable for you. Also, what type of tension. So I like top of the keyway tension for these types of locks, although you can do bottom of the keyway tension as well, but I feel like that limits a lot of your movement to work through the warding there in order to reach high cut pins that are behind low cut pins. So if you really want to optimize your movement in the lock, you really got to go with the top of the keyway. Next, I'll be going over the angle of the keyway. If you notice, the keyway isn't actually straight, it's on an offset angle, like that. If it was straight, it would be more like this. Now, one of the biggest problems I've found when I started picking this lock is I would pick it like this, directly upwards, and I'd feel everything is binding. Wow, it's so tight, and no matter how hard I press, I just can't get these pins to set. And that's actually because you're not picking the pins, you're picking the warding, you're picking the side of the lock. In order to pick this lock, you got to rotate everything on an angle, and you got to pick on this awkward angle here. But when you feel that you are at the right angle, you will notice the pins in a very defined way. So make sure to work through the lock to feel, even without your tensioner, just work through the lock to feel those pins so you can make sure that you are used to the correct angle to work through that keyway. Alright, let's move on to the next step, which is marking your pick. What you'll need is your pick, a fine tip Sharpie, a plug, and the pin to help guide you, the key pin. Let's put it in the final slot that's active in the plug, which is slot 5. Put our finger over top of it to block it, and try to feel for a bump inside of the plug with your pick. You'll know that you're on it because you'll feel the pin actually pushing into your finger once you've found it. When you have found it, now it takes a little bit of finessing. Try to balance your pick right in the center of it as perfect as you can. And then take a fine tip Sharpie. Make sure to mark it a little bit so that the ink is coming out. And then just make a little pilot mark right on the edge of your pick right at that point. And so now you know that pin 5 is right at that point right here. Now we're not done yet, because we're going to take this section of the lock, since when we have it in the housing, this will be pushing the plug a little bit further in, which means you have to measure your line just a little bit further back. So put this right up next to your line, and then mark right next to it. Now we have our true mark right here for where slot 5 is. I'm going to do this again for the rest of the slots, and I'll be right back. Okay, now our pick is fully marked up. Two things that I forgot to mention earlier is to erase your pilot lines as you go, and also carry your lines over to the opposite side, so that way you have more to help you visualize. You may notice not all the lines are evenly spaced out as well, and that's totally fine. The main thing is that it feels comfortable when you're actually testing it out. Now that your pick is fully marked up, the way that you can use it is when you stick your pick into the lock, you will notice those lines, when they're flush with the body of the lock, that will be the pin that you're on. So pin 5, pin 4, pin 3, pin 2, and pin 1. That will help you greatly as you progress in your lockpicking journey. You will notice that as you use this pick, these lines start to wear down. So first thing is make sure to reapply your Sharpie mark so you don't have to do this whole process over again. But furthermore, you'll notice that as they start to wear down, one time they'll wear down and you won't even feel like you need to put the lines back on, because you'll know where the pins are already. It's a great learning tool that I actually picked up from a fellow YouTuber and lockpicker named Norlin, and it has made a world of a difference for myself, and I really recommend it to any beginner who doesn't really have a good sense of where the pins are. So if you are in that position, mark your pick. All right, after all of that, I think that we're ready to actually get into some picking. But before we do, let's go over what progressive pinning is. Progressive pinning is a method that many pickers implement in order to learn a difficult lock to make it more easy. Essentially what you're doing is you're removing some of the pins out of the lock and only putting a few pins in. That way you get more comfortable with the feel and the nuances of that kind of feedback and the way that lock operates. And as you become more comfortable, you can add more pins in, work from the other side of the lock, and eventually work your way to where it's fully pinned up again and you're ready to pick it all pinned up. Now, my strategy for progressive pinning is I like to start with the first 2 pins. After I put the first 2 pins in, I will try to get a bit comfortable with that until I can add in the 3rd pin. Now, sometimes I will put in pin 1 and 2, and then I'll do 2 and 3, and then I'll do 1, 2, and 3. But with the Amreican 1100, I want to challenge you to try to do 1, 2, and then once you can do that, just add the 3rd one in straight away. Once you're comfortable with 3 pins, you will have a good sense for yourself whether you should add the 4th pin in. You can try to do that. Or something that I actually like to do is dump everything out, and then I will start again the whole process, but from the back. So I'll put in pin 5 and pin 4. Oops. I'll get more used to that until I'm comfortable, and then I will add in pin 3. And at this point in my head, I'll tell myself, I can pick all of the pins, just separately. So if I can pick them all separately, then I can pick them all together if I practice a little bit more. So once I'm at that point, I have a good sense to either just continue adding in 4 or what I might need to change up in order to get the right order and feel if there's a specific pin combination that is challenging for me. And if there is, then I will spend time with those pins that are challenging and to get more comfortable with that, so that way I can attack the lock more effectively when it's fully pinned up. Currently we have 2 pins in the lock, but don't screw it up yet, literally. If you screw this in and the lock isn't right, then you will be hooped. Instead, what you should do is lock it up without the screw. That way when you test it, if it's not working, you can literally pull everything out just by wiggling a little bit, and the plug will come right out. Now, if it is working, then you're good to just screw it up properly. But when we're progressive pinning, there's lots of pins that go in all sorts of different places, and we're working with all sorts of different things. So it's easy to lose things, and it's also easy to put things in the wrong order. So make sure to test before you end up screwing up your lock and making it much more difficult to pick than it was when you first got it. All right, now that we're ready to go, I'm going to show you guys how I will approach picking it with 2 pins. Now, when I pinned it up, I noticed that pin 1 was a serrated pin and pin 2 was a spooled. So we're gonna keep that in mind as we pick. The first pin, I can feel right on the line that we made a pin. So I'm gonna put some pressure. I felt a little click, and I felt it pop into a false set, which is what we would expect when we pick a serrated pin and all that's left is a spooled pin. So now I'm going to go to pin 2. I feel right on that line that we made, pin 2, and I feel that it's a spool giving me counter rotation. So I'm just gonna push it up until the end of that counter rotation, and the lock opens up. All right, now we're gonna pin it up to 3 and see how we can go from there. Now I have 3 pins in here. Although I moved to that rather quick, I recommend that you stay at 2 pins until you're comfortable with it, and then move to higher amounts of pins as you progress, and that goes for any stage you're at in the progressive pinning process. So we'll start tensioning the lock here, and now I'm specifically going to try to pay attention to the differences that there were between just 2 pins and 3. So I feel pin 1 slightly binding, so I'll apply a little bit of force with my pick, and I felt it click a bit. Now it feels a little bit loose, and I'm really just tickling it using very, very light pressure. As you can see, I'm barely even pushing with anything. So now I'm going to check pin 2. Pin 2 also feels slightly binding, so I'm just going to put a little bit of force, and it popped up. I'm going to check pin 3. Clicked a little bit there. Now I'm going to go back, check pin 1. Oh, and I felt like I fell right into a false set, so I'm going to check pin 2 because I know that's our spool. Getting some counter rotation. Almost at the top of that spool there, and set, and it's open. Now, when I'm picking, first of all, I'm noticing the ink from one side is rubbing off on my fingers, so yeah, maybe I wasn't so right about suggesting to put it on both sides. Just put it on the side that you're actually looking. But the other thing is that, let's say you lock it back up from here. Notice the plug just spun 180 degrees. If I try to put my key in to turn it, the plate is blocking it, the shape of that plate. So I'm going to have to use my tensioner, and then I can rotate it back. Just a little thing that a couple people, including myself, have wondered about what happened there. It just basically turns the actuator into a plug spinner because of the core on the, or the spring on the core there. Now it's up to you how you want to move forward in your progressive pinning process. You can keep pins 1, 2, and 3 and then add pin 4 and try that, and then if you're comfortable, go right away to 5 pins. Or you can start from the back and then try pins 5 and 4 by themselves, and then get comfortable with that and move on to 5, 4, and 3. Get comfortable with that and then work your way all the way to 5 pins that way. However you feel fits for you, you should do, but never be afraid to take a step back and try a different combination of slots in order to get a better feel for the feedback that your lock provides. Now we have the lock fully pinned up, and I'll be going over some tips and tricks in order to help you get your first open. Starting with medium tension and going with our pick through the pins one by one, following the lines that we made on it earlier, just to feel for something that stands out. 5 right away is binding very tightly, so I'm just gonna vary my tension by bouncing it like that as I try to lightly tap the pin. I don't want to go light tension too much, but That way when I tickle it, I kind of prevent it from oversetting. Now going back to pin 1 and feeling, again, same thing. And I felt like 1 just popped into place. 2. Now checking 3. 3 feels okay. 4. 4 gave me a little click. 5 feels okay too. Let's go back to 1. 1, 2 gave me a little click this time. 3 gave me some nice little clicks. And I fell into a false set right with that. So just going back from the beginning to see where I'm at. And 2 is giving me counter rotation right away. And I felt like he set, and we are open. So just feeling through the pins one by one and letting the lock really talk to you is the key to success when it comes to these locks. If you are applying too much force, you'll easily overset the pin, and it's really all about balance and tension control. Anyways, thank you very much for watching my guide on how to pick your very first Amreican 1100, and if you have any questions or comments, please leave them below, and don't be shy to contact me if you ever need any help. Take care.